Ladies and gents, boys and girls, welcome back to BB's Customs. I'm Rich, and today is part 2, looking at the fuel tank. Okay, so I've got a new tin of paint stripper, which arrived in the post today. As I said in the last video, next day delivery, wonderful thing. We're going to be getting it onto the tank. I'm using a different one today. This is an Autotech paint stripper. Normally I use the high coat one, but they didn't have any in stock for next day delivery, so this is the next best thing really. It's all fundamentally the same thing. As long as it gets the paint off, I don't really care. So we're going to take this outside, spray it up, and then see how much of this paint we can get off on the first hit. Okay, so there we go. Most of the paint is off. Give you a quick show around. So that actually came out not too bad at all. I quite like the look of it like that, to be honest. There's a lot to be said for like a decent rat bike or some sort of retro looking, been through the walls sort of machine. I like that a lot. But that's not what this one's about. The next thing to do, I've rinsed all the excess paint stripper off with water and a sponge. So now what I need to do is just go over this with a heat gun and make sure that this is bone dry, because obviously being just bare steel, if there's water on it, it's going to rust like hell. So we've got to dry it all off, make sure it's totally dry, and then we'll move on to the next part. Okay, so you've got it nice and dry. It's ready for, what would this be, part 3, part 4 of the process. So now we've got to get all of this last little bit of red off and start tackling the rust. Once that's done, then we can start getting the filler out. Now, to get the rust off, you could stand here for hours and hours and hours and do it by hand with some wet and dry or something like that. Or you can use an angle grinder with a Scotch-Brite pad on it, which is what I'm going to do, because I don't have hours and hours and hours. Okay, there we go. Now, I should have said this before I started that, but in the interest of health and safety, which is not something I'm massive on, but for something like this, it really does need mentioning. If you're going to use an angle grinder with a Scotch pad on, you need to remember this is still an abrasive disc. This is still taking off metal. It does spark. It might only just be a little bit, but it does spark. And this is basically a canister full of fuel. So you need to make sure 100% that there is no fuel left in your fuel tank before you go anywhere near it with any sort of lighting source. Because, believe it or not, an empty tank is more explosive than a full tank. If this had just fuel fumes in it and it caught a spark, the chances are it would explode in my face and I would be very much in trouble. So yes, make sure it's totally empty. If you need to, fill it up with water, get everything out, drain the water back out of it again, and then dry it with the hot air gun. That's probably the single most important thing when doing any sort of refurbishment work or touching up work on a tank. If you're going to do any welding, any grinding, any cutting, anything which produces heat or a spark, make sure there is zero fuel left in your tank. But we didn't blow up, so we're alright. The top is done with the angle grinder. Now don't make the mistake as well that you're thinking this is the last step of sanding this down. It really isn't. This is just getting the last bits of red off and making sure that everything is where I think it is, with regards to rust and deposits of rubbish and things like that. We've got to get rid of all of that. I still need to do the underneath, which now, if I zoom you in, now you can really see just where the rust is. So we've got these patches here and a bit down the middle and some on the sides just in here and in here. They are the typical places to find rust underneath the tank, because you get spray coming up from under the wall, from the front wheel. It hits the engine, it evaporates up and condenses underneath the tank. So you always get a bit of surface rust under here. The important thing to make sure though is that it is just surface rust. If it's rusted through, if you're good with a TIG welder or something like that, you could patch it up, but I mean, you might as well get a new tank, really. Particularly if it's really bad, don't bother, just get a new tank, because this stuff is so thin, it's a pain, an absolute nightmare to try and weld up a tank. Don't get me wrong, it can be done. Like, if you do it enough, I'm sure you find it very easy. But I mean, cutting holes in tanks, welding them up again is... I mean, I did one, I had to move the petcock on one, I moved it back a bit. I think it was about 3 inches on an old Honda, and yeah, it's doable, it's just a pain. And you've got to make sure that it's perfectly sealed as well, because the tiniest little pinprick hole in your weld and you're leaking fuel, which is never good. But anyway, onwards. Hand sanding the inside of here because I can't sensibly get the angle grinder in. I do that off camera because you know what sanding's like. I'll also give this a total once over, because if I get it in the light right, you can see it's covered in lines. At the moment, if I painted that, it would come out with lots of lines in the paint. So I need to sand all that back, get it lovely and smooth, and then we'll get the filler in there, fill up these holes, and do even more sanding. Right, now we've got most of the rust off. Basically all I've done is get, particularly underneath, I've got the troubled areas, the big chunky stuff. We've got all that back to pretty much bare metal. There's still a little bit of discoloration there, but it's not rust, it's just where it's had a chemical reaction with the steel and it's just darkened it a bit. The paint I've got coming to put underneath the tank has actually got a rust inhibitor built into it anyway, so I'm not really worried by it. It's going to be nice and black, it will seal it, it'll kill off any small rust bits which are still there. But now we're ready to start filling some of these dents. So what I'm going to use, if I zoom in on you there, is a P38 general purpose filler. I've used this dozens of times on cars and bikes before. It's really easy to use, it's a 2-part filler. It comes with instructions, but we don't want them. It comes with a hardener, a spatula / stirrer to apply it to wherever you need to go. The lid is also a little mixing pot, so when you take that out you can scoop out as much filler as you want, put it in there, put your activator in. The thing to remember is to get your ratios right, which are actually in those instructions. If you've never used it before, you might still need it. But basically, if you don't put enough in, it won't go hard. If you put too much in, it'll go too hard, too fast, and you won't be able to move it to where you need it to. So we'll mix it up, we'll get it on, and start sanding it back. Okay, so we've got the filler on. I've put some in the smaller bits at the top and some little dings I saw around. I really threw it on. I haven't been neat with it because it's going to be sanded back anyway. I've chucked it into all the big deep ones. I fully expect that when I sand this back I'm going to have to put more filler over the top just to get a nice smooth finish. Because the problem with having such a deep dent, I mean even if your dent's only say less than 10 mil, so somewhere between 5 and 10 mil thick, as soon as you start filling that with filler, as you scrape the spatula across, it drags it, and you end up getting like a little dimple or a divot in your filler. So don't be worried about throwing loads on and then have to sand it back. It's all part of the process. It's better to put more on and take it off rather than try and make do with not enough. Another thing to do as well is, if I find it, when you're finished, always make sure that you clean off your tools as quickly as you can, because if you don't have a nice keen edge on them when you come to use them next time, you'll actually put scrape marks in the new filler you're putting on, which is not what you want. So I've cleaned those off. I've just got to let this set. Setting time fully depends on how much hardener you put in it. I put in, you probably saw in the video, I put in that last little bit for good luck. I shouldn't have done that. That made it a little bit too much. So it started to harden up on me as I was putting it in. It's probably a joke in there somewhere. I'd imagine, I mean, this is already going pretty firm. I would say this would be ready to sand in, if I leave it an hour or so, it'll probably be totally fine. So I shall come back to this. I'm going to go have a cup of tea. I'll see you in a sec. Right. So I got my tea. Whilst we are waiting for this, a little bit about filler. For some reason, a lot of people have a big aversion to using filler or buying vehicles which have filler in them or on them, which I don't fully understand. I mean, alright, you get some people who do completely abuse filler, and where a job should have some major welding done or something like that, I'll quickly chuck some filler on to sell it, and then it's someone else's problem. Totally agree. Not a good thing to do. It's risky, it's dangerous. You're putting other people's lives in jeopardy. What if they are driving along with their kids in the car and it falls in half because instead of welding it together you put some poly filler on it? But with stuff like this, I mean, filling dents, it's not a huge issue. I mean, if you drill a hole in your wall to put shelves up and then 6 months later you don't like it, you take it down, you don't take all the plasterboard off and put a new bit of plasterboard in, you fill the hole. So filling a few dents with filler is perfectly acceptable in my opinion. I mean, it is only my opinion, feel free to disagree. But particularly if you don't know how to weld, or your fabrication skills you feel aren't up to scratch, then go for it, chuck some filler on, sand it back. You can always take it back out if it doesn't work. It's a pain to do it, but you can. So don't be afraid to use it. Don't be put off by other people saying, oh, you don't do that, you should weld it, you should pull that dent out. If it's all you can do, it's all you can do. So go for it. Anyway, rant over. This is nice and hard, so we'll get the sandpaper out, we'll start taking this back. I'm going to go heavy on it. I'm going to go 120, something like that, to get the bulk of this off. The thinner bits on top, we'll go at those with 400, something like that, just to smooth them down, because I don't want to take it out the holes. And then we'll see where we stand. We'll have a good look over it, see if I've missed any bits, mix up some more if I have to, rinse, repeat, until we're ready to put the primer on. Right, it's a little dusty in here now. Another health and safety thing. 2 in 1 video is not bad. I haven't got one. I need to get one. If you're doing this in an enclosed space, like I am, really you should have a respirator on or something similar, or at least a face mask, because this dust is horrible. I've probably just taken about 5 years off my life doing this. I mean, I don't know what's in it. What's it say on there? Any warnings? Avoid breathing. Avoid breathing in. Keep out of reach. Don't drink. Don't breathe in the vapors. Don't get it in your eyes. Yeah, basically, it's not good. Oh, and I need to rinse myself off before I go back in the house, because it says right there. For those of you who don't know, my other half, who's in the house at the moment, is currently very pregnant, and it says right here, causes severe eye irritation and suspicion of damage to unborn children. So, do not use this if you're pregnant. Right, anyway, so I've gone over this with my little mouse sander. I've taken the bulk of it off. It's looking much better now. If I bring this all up so you can see, I've got a little bit extra to fill there, which I thought I'd have to. A little bit extra to fill here, which I thought I had to. And there, which I said, you know, they were the deepest dents. I knew they were going to be a problem area, but now that I've got basically a much smaller dent to fill, I've got far more control over it. The rest of it has come out really nicely. If you look on these, you just need, like, there's one there, there's one there, there's one there. All you need to do is go over it with a nice feathered edge. A key thing to remember when sanding this down is don't just hold the sandpaper in your hand and go over it, because your fingers will actually go down into where the dent was and you'd end up sanding the dent back into your work. If you're going to use just sandpaper or glass paper like this, wrap it around a block of wood like that, and then as you go over it, you just follow the curvature of your tank, because what you're aiming to do is recreate that curve using the existing lines of the tank. And what you should end up with is a really nice smooth feathered edge where you've got steel into filler back into steel, and you shouldn't be able to feel it. If you can run your fingers over it and you can feel a difference, it's not right yet, because anything you can feel will show up really well when you actually put the paint on. So you've got to make sure it's super smooth everywhere. I am going to refill these last 3 holes, sand them back, and then we look at putting primer on. Okay, so I've got fiddler in my beard. So after a lot of sanding and playing around, we now have, if I get around so you can see, we now have a nice filled tank. Doesn't look like much at the moment because you can still see all the filler, but once the paint gets on there, I mean, lovely and smooth all the way around. Even this big horrible one down here, I mean, that dent was massive if you remember. I've tried to follow the curve as best I can. So we'll get some primer on, and then once that's on, we'll really see how good a job I've done at the filling. Okay, so the primer I'm using is the same one I normally use. Acid Etch, Autotech, pretty bog standard grey primer. Give it a nice light coat first, and then build it up slowly after that. If there are any little issues with the finish, then we can touch those up as we go along, and then have a look at where we stand ready for the base coat. Okay, so it's still wet, I can't touch it, but let's have a closer look and see if we can see any blemishes in there. Okay, so if you remember, there was a large that you can just see a slight discoloration in the, or a slight change in texture just there. That's where some filler was. There were a couple of little pinpricks just here which need a little bit of touching up. If we come down here again, you can see the change in colour there. That's where the filler is. And the other big one was there. Again, a slight change in colour. Can't see because of the light very well. But once that's set, once this coat of primer dries, look over, I mean it's a nice even coat all over. I mean, at a glance, once the extra paint goes on, you could probably get away with not doing anything. But we'll do it properly because, you know, we're on camera. Back on there so I can see you, or you can see me, because I'm devilishly handsome like that. Right, I'm going to leave this here for a day, I think. I mean, primer you can normally leave for like 20 minutes and then put another coat on, but what I want to do is let this set. I want it to fully cure, and then I can go over it with some very fine wet and dry, so upwards of 1600, somewhere around there, just to take any high spots off, try and blend in the slight discoloration. I'll put some tiny little bits of filler back into here where these little dots were, blend those in, put another coat of primer on, and then we should be ready for the top coat. Those bits I'll do off camera because you've seen it once, you don't want to see it again. So I'll get it ready to put the next layers of paint on, which will be in the next episode. Now I'm going to call it a day for this one. We've made good progress, I'm really pleased with how it's looking. Feel free to comment if you think there are better ways of doing it. I mean, just because this is the way I've done it doesn't mean it's the right way of doing it or the only way of doing it. I mean, there are hundreds of ways. So if you've got any other experience, I am more than willing to learn from your suggestions. Hopefully you found this educational, it'll be helpful to you. Thanks again for watching and for your continued support. I'm getting a lot of comments coming through now on some of the videos, which is encouraging. It's nice to know that people feel they can ask me stuff, so please feel free, keep doing that. Don't forget to stay safe. Tune in next time for part 3, and I'll catch you then. Cheers.